I'm going to tell you what I saw. Not what I heard said afterward, and plenty was said, in the way that plenty always gets said in a town of 240 people when something happens that doesn't fit the story the town has already decided to tell about itself. I'm going to tell you what I saw with my own eyes, because I was there, and because I've lived long enough to know that the version passed around a town tends to smooth out the parts that would require people to think harder about themselves. My name is Earl Goss. 62 years old. Ferryman in Haldane, Montana for 38 of those years, which means I've seen everyone who came into this town and everyone who left it. I'm going to tell you about two of them. The first is Hank Pruitt. Hank came to Haldane in the spring of 1873, bought the property at the north end of town that had been sitting empty since old Carswell died, and set about fixing what needed fixing with the efficiency of a man who expects no help. Large, not in the way of men who make a point of it, but in the way of men who simply are. A face that had been in weather. A way of looking at things I can only describe as complete. When Hank Pruitt looked at something, he saw all of it. That was unnerving to people accustomed to being seen partially. The town decided what he was inside of a week. I watched it happen from the door of the ferryman's post, the people crossing to the other side of the street, the conversations that stopped when he walked in, the particular choreography of a town deciding collectively that a man was something to be wary of. What I did not watch was Hank Pruitt do anything to deserve it. He was quiet. He paid his debts. He helped Roy Decker get his wagon out of the mud in April without being asked and without staying for the thanks. He had a gray dog that followed him everywhere and was better behaved than most of the children in Haldane. I walked over once in his second month. A man returning a ruined piece of land, methodically, to something that worked. He looked up, assessed me, said good morning. We talked 10 minutes. Tennessee. Union side in the war, I mention it only because it mattered later. He didn't say much about it. He said enough. I revised my opinion of Hank Pruitt upward considerably. The town's opinion did not change. Mae Coulter arrived in Haldane on the 9th of October, 1873, on the last stage before the mountain roads became unreliable. Small woman, dark coat, the careful posture of someone who has carried herself through difficult circumstances long enough that it became the default position. A bag and a letter. Husband dead of a mining accident in Idaho 18 months prior, no family in this part of the country, a letter from a pastor in Boise who apparently knew someone in Haldane, though when Mae went to find that someone, the connection was thinner than advertised. I watched her go into the general store and come out recalibrating. I watched her try the boarding house. Margaret Sears had opinions about young widows traveling alone that she held with the conviction of someone who has never examined where her opinions came from. I watched her try the church, where Pastor Hensley expressed sympathy with considerably more warmth than practical assistance. I watched 3 hours of this. I am not proud of what I did during those 3 hours, which was watch. I had a room above the post that wasn't being used. I told myself it wasn't appropriate, that she'd find something. I told myself these things with the practiced ease of a man who has used them before. At 7 in the evening I came out to close up and found Mae Coulter sitting on my front step. Not crying. Not performing distress. Simply sitting with her bag beside her and her hands in her lap, with the expression of someone who has exhausted the options and is waiting to see what happens next. I was about to say something, I'm still not certain what, when I heard boots on the boardwalk. Hank Pruitt came around the corner with his dog at his heel, heading, as he did every Tuesday, toward the general store. He saw Mae on my step. He stopped. He looked at her. He looked at the bag. He looked at the sky, which had the color of a sky that intends to be significantly colder by morning. He looked at me. I don't know what he saw in my face. Whatever it was, it confirmed something he had already decided. Ma'am, he said. To Mae. Have you got somewhere to stay tonight? Mae looked up at him. She did the calculation I had watched her do with every person she'd approached that day, the rapid assessment of a woman alone deciding whether a stranger is safe. She looked at him for a long moment. No, she said. Hank nodded once. I've got a storage room on the south side of my property, he said. It's dry and the stove works. It's not much. Mae stood up. She picked up her bag. I'll take it, she said. They walked off down the main street, the dog between them. I stood on my step and watched them go and felt, with some clarity, like a man who has just been shown something about himself he would have preferred not to know. I want to be precise about what happened next, because the version that circulated in Haldane was not. The version said Hank Pruitt had taken a woman into his home, which implied things about the arrangement that were not accurate. What actually happened was he cleaned out the storage room on the south end of his property, separate building, its own door, its own stove, and gave Mae Coulter the use of it. He built a proper latch that worked from the inside. He left firewood stacked outside it every morning without being asked. Mae told me this when she came by 3 days later to ask about work. I gave her what I had, mending that had piled up, a cleaning job I'd been putting off. He hasn't asked for anything, she said. I offered to cook in exchange and he said that was fine, but he didn't ask. That's Hank, I said. Which was all I knew how to say about it. The town doesn't like him, she said. Not a question. The town doesn't know him. Why not? I thought about the men who'd crossed the street, the conversations that stopped. The war and what it did to men and to the people who watched them come back, the distance that opened between those who had been there and those who hadn't, and how that distance could calcify into something that looked, from the outside, like menace. He's hard to read, I said. Mae looked out the window at the main street, where 2 women from the church had just crossed to the opposite boardwalk as Hank walked by with a lumber order. He's not hard to read, she said quietly. People just aren't looking at the right things. The room he built her took 11 days. Not the storage room, that was already there. The room. What Hank built in 11 days between mid-October and the 1st of November was a proper room on the south side of his main structure, real window, wood floor, door with a good lock, small covered porch that kept the snow off the entrance. I watched him build it. Not every day, I had my own work, but often enough to see the shape of what he was doing. Before full light in the mornings, until he couldn't see in the evenings. No announcement of what he was doing or why. No performance of generosity that might have made it easier for the town to understand. Mae worked alongside him for the last 3 days, handing materials, holding things level when 2 sets of hands were needed. They worked without speaking much, the comfortable silence of people who have developed a vocabulary of gesture that makes words less necessary. Margaret Sears came to find me on the 8th day. Earl, she said, don't you think someone ought to say something? About what? I said. About that situation. What situation? A man building a room on his own property? She pressed her lips together in the way she did when she felt she was being deliberately obtuse, which in this case she was right about. You know what I mean, she said. I know what you think you mean, I said. I'm not certain you do. She left. I went back to work. The night of the first hard freeze, 4th of November, was the night I stopped having any doubts about Hank Pruitt's character, in the event I'd had any left. I don't sleep well in the early cold. I was at my window when I saw the light in the new room go out, and 20 minutes later saw it come back on. The stove had gone out, Mae told me the next morning, the pipe had a blockage she hadn't known about. What I saw from my window at midnight was Hank coming out of his cabin with a lantern and spending the better part of an hour on the roof clearing the pipe. The lantern moving in the dark. Then the window light steadying to the warm color of a stove working again. He climbed down. Went back to his cabin. Did not knock. Did not wait to be thanked. He just fixed it. I stood at my window thinking about the town and its opinions and the confidence with which people decide what a man is from a distance, without the inconvenient complication of paying attention to what he actually does. Nobody in Haldane would have been on someone's roof at midnight in the first hard freeze. Nobody except the man they had decided to be afraid of. The winter closed in through November. Mae found her place. She took over the mending work at the general store when the woman who'd been doing it had a baby and needed the winter to recover. Quick and precise, Carl Bauer told me her standard was higher than he'd had in years. She paid Hank a small sum for the room from her second month's earnings. He accepted it without comment. I watched the town revise, slowly and without acknowledgement, its position on Mae. A woman who worked and paid her debts could be accommodated by Haldane's social arithmetic in ways that a woman with nowhere to go could not. It was an ugly calculation. The people making it would not have called it that. I had been watching people make it for 38 years. What I also watched was what happened between Mae and Hank over that winter, nothing dramatic and everything significant. Supper together most evenings. She cooked, he ate, no excessive gratitude that would have made it feel like charity. They talked. Not much at first, not about large things, but with the slow expansion of two people who have discovered the other one is worth talking to. My post is not far from Hank's property. On evenings when I walked by I could see the light in the main cabin window and hear the low sound of conversation without making out the words. I didn't try. I just noted that the sound was there, where before there had been only the silence of a man who had run out of people to talk to. Spring came late to Haldane that year. Mud first, then the creek running high and brown, then one morning in late March when I came out of my post and the air smelled different, thawed, turned, alive in the way mountain air gets when the season finally decides to change. I saw Mae come out of the new room and stand on the small covered porch, looking at the mountains, then at the main street, with the expression of someone taking a measurement. I saw Hank come out of the main cabin with 2 cups of coffee and hand one to her without a word. I watched them stand together on that porch, looking at the same mountains and the same street in the same silence. And I thought, that's it, then. Not because anything had been declared. Nothing had. But I had spent 38 years watching people in this town, and I knew the difference between 2 people standing next to each other and 2 people standing together. What I saw on that porch was the second thing, solid, quiet, without performance. The town would catch up eventually. Towns always do, once the fact of something is undeniable enough that disputing it costs more energy than accepting it. But that morning it was just 2 people on a porch with coffee, and the mountains, and a winter they had come through together without having planned to. Nobody in Haldane would take her in. Hank Pruitt built her a room. And if you ask me, Earl Goss, ferryman, 62 years, 38 of them watching this town make decisions about people it didn't bother to know, that is the whole story. Everything else is just the sound a town makes when it is trying to explain why it didn't do something a man with a lumber order and a gray dog did without being asked. Some people see what's needed. Some people do something about it. I've lived long enough to know the difference is rarer than it should be.